Research in Asia and Center for Youth and Social Development. With generous support from the Niti Aayog, Voluntary Action Network India, and Federation of Indian Chambers and Commerce and Industry, FICCI. The first edition of Samagam was organized in April 28 to commemorate the 35th anniversary of Pradhan. Gladly, Pradhan's spirit of celebration was expanded to commemorate the incredible achievements of Indian civil society and more broadly by the development sector. Ladies and gentlemen, the second edition of Samagam 2020 is being organized in an unprecedented and extraordinary circumstance. The repercussions of the global pandemic on Indian society, economy, and polity, like other parts of the world, have been overwhelming. The onset of pandemic occurred at a time when as a society, we are faced with greatest challenges posed by entrenched poverty and deprivation, growing inequalities and exclusion, rising conflicts between cultures, democratization, and adverse impact of the climate change. The pandemic has exacerbated challenges manifold. Importantly, the prospect of achieving the Sustainable Development Goal and realizing the global vision, no one left behind within the globally agreed time frame, seems more and more challenging. As prominently expressed by Shri Amitabh Kant from the Niti Aayog, and I quote, India's development challenges and achievement of SDGs needs participation and a collaborative consultative approach by all key stakeholders, including corporates, civil society, media, academia, and citizens, besides the state. I see Samagam 2020 as a positive initiative in forging such alliances and partnerships. In the same spirit, Dr. Rajesh Tandon from Priya hopes, I quote, concrete actions may follow by all parties to Samagam that broadens and deepens collaboration across sectors to achieve SDGs. It's now clear to many of us that no single actor, government, business, or civil society alone can effectively confront and surmount these challenges, particularly for the well-being and emancipation of the most vulnerable and marginalized in our society. It is in this context, Samagam 2020 is boldly ambitious and aspirational. On one hand, and feet on the ground. As Anshul Gupta expresses his inspiration. I quote, during this always of the pandemic, NGOs and have played an important role in reverse migration to now rehabilitation. Forward to the conversation with critical stakeholders, learning and approaches. Most importantly, we have how we need to change the Likewise, from public let's aspire that Samagam 2020 serves to showcase positive trust and collaboration that have
that
led to
have
better
led to better
and contributed to greater social justice at a scale.
justice at a scale.
Samagam
Samagam
2020 is a
20
venue for
is a
sharing
venue for sharing
and ideation to explore the
ideation
prospect of
for the
collaboration
prospect
from
collaboration
the
from
state,
the state,
business, and civil society.
business and civil society.
The Troika
The Troika
Ajar Samaj.
Ajar
As
Samaj.
Narendranath from Pradhan
Pradanat
that Samagam
that
establishes
Samagam
itself
establishes
as a
itself as a
well-accepted force
well-accepted force
facilitating
facilitating
multi-stakeholder partnerships
multi-stakeholder partners
in the spirit of
in the
SD.
spirit of SD.
In becoming
In
so,
becoming so,
Mr. Binay Acharya
Mr.
from
Vinay
Vajra
Acharya from Vajra
and Unnati
and Unnati recently
will not
will
indulge
not
in induced bleeding, will keep our civility, continue our work as passionately as we have been doing, and open ourselves for discussion and dialogue with others without sacrificing our values, perspectives, and relevance. Friends and colleagues, this is an opportunity for the entire development ecosystem to rebuild, reinvigorate, and reframe on how we engage with each other, serve our communities, and live up to our values. Governments, businesses, and civil society will need to strengthen the spirit of collaboration to ensure that we pursue the agenda of making society and economy inclusive, making democracy work for all, and making our planet resilient and sustainable. Let me end by quoting Sri Vijay Mahajan, who aptly put it as Samagam 2020 is a space for calibration, collaboration, and celebration. Ladies and gentlemen, let me take this terrific opportunity to welcome you again to the second edition of Samagam 2020. Over the next 2 days, we'll deliberate, discuss, and decide on a range of issues relevant to the lives of millions of poor and vulnerable people. I sincerely hope that you had an opportunity to take a look at the entire program agenda. In case you have missed it, please take a look at it. We promise this is going to be one of the finest deliberations you have ever attended. With this, let's move straight to the next segment of our program. I urge you to stay with us. Give us a minute and we'll go to the first keynote session. Thank you so much. Once again, you are most welcome to Samagam 2020.
Good morning. It feels good to be with all of you, my fellow travelers, in this development journey. I am pleased to deliver the keynote address at Samagam 2020 on this virtual platform. At the outset, kudos to Pradhan and its CSO partners, the Niti Aayog and FICCI, for having chosen collaboration as the cornerstone of this conference to slam the spectre of poverty still looming over our nation. We in India face unprecedented challenges. One third of our nearly 1.3 billion population is mired in poverty. The COVID pandemic has worsened the situation. The poverty stats, the number of unemployed, and lives destroyed are shocking. So we have an even bigger issue for us, which is restoring the dignity of the poor and rebuilding the economy hand in hand with the government. It is so obvious that to alleviate these heart-wrenching conditions, we just cannot function alone. No single entity, be it government, corporates, or NGOs, can alter the scenario by themselves. We need to work collectively to make a difference. Only when the government, corporates, entrepreneurs, leaders, and change makers pull together in the same direction can we tackle our humongous problems. In rebuilding the economy in all its aspects, I believe it is intuitively right to collaborate at every level with those who have a sense of shared vision. Today, the Samagam organizers have put forth three asks of me. First, to give a brief idea about our work in the context of building stakeholder partnerships to stoke social development and share the process. Secondly, present narratives that have led to amazing outcomes. And thirdly, what thoughts would I want you to always have uppermost in your lens of life? We work with over 100 NGOs across the country in 7,000 villages under the aegis of the Aditya Birla Center for Community Initiatives and Rural Development, which I am privileged to chair. When we choose to partner with an NGO, we apply three core principles. The first is the strategic fit with our vision. Our vision is to actively contribute to the social and economic development of the communities in which we operate. In sync with the UN SDGs, our endeavor is to lift the burden of poverty, weighing down the underserved, and foster inclusive growth. In doing so, build a better, sustainable way of life for the weaker and marginalized sections of society. The second relates to the authenticity of the NGO and whether it is a meritocracy. The alignment on our expected destination, the milestones, and the time frame all are important. The third is their people profile. The people factor is critical because you may have the best of strategies, but unless you have people with a calling, people with a passion to transform the lives of the underprivileged, your strategy will fail. I'm happy that on all these counts, we have been fortunate to have been able to identify quite competent partners, including Pradhan. At the Aditya Birla Group, in over 1,500 villages, we are intensely engaged in the upliftment of the farmers through watershed management, training exposure visits, nurturing farmer producer organizations, enhancing agriculture productivity through intercropping, multi-layer farming, and more. Among the other institutions that work closely with us are the Krishi Vigyan Kendras, ICRISAT, NABARD, and NGO like BEV, Myrada, Aid A Action, to name a few. We have helped set up 4,500 self-help groups with nearly 50,000 women members. In all these villages, our teams, on the back of the collector and district authorities, have made remarkable progress. Farm incomes, literacy levels, healthcare, and societal happiness have all registered an impressive rise. Poverty levels have shrunk a lot. With Pradhan, we support a collaborative and holistic socio-economic development project with tribal communities in 231 villages spanning Madhya Pradesh, Mandla, and Dindori districts. Since the inception of our program 2 years ago, we have teamed up with self-help groups, gram panchayats, local institutions, and district administration, among others, to optimize funds and have a program that is sustainable, scalable, and replicable. Let me give you a helicopter view of our achievement in our project with Pradhan. Here, 2,500 self-help groups comprising of 28,000 women farmers have been formed. 10,500 households have attained food security through captive farm cultivation. Of these 10,500 households, up until now, 5,684 families, besides becoming food secure, have earned an annual income of rupees 60,000, largely from agriculture and livestock trade. Furthermore, 175 acres of barren upland has seen fruit replantation, leading to enhanced productivity and income. Like in all our projects, the highlight of this project is the partnerships that Pradhan has managed to create with different stakeholders. Large sums of program investments have been mobilized from government schemes like Manrega and integrated watershed development programs. This project is a good example of an effective collaboration between a corporate CSR, an NGO, and the state government. It augurs well that on the rural front, the government has announced the Agri Infrastructure Funds of rupees 1 lakh crore for making infrastructure entailing storage facilities, processing, and logistic support. This is a forward step in bolstering the rural economy. It would lead to a reaffirmation process, bringing in sustainable yield improvements through scientific farming practices, better price realization, and more. Again, this is an opportune moment for the government, CSOs, and various market players to enter into well designed collaborative arrangements to support the farmer producer institutions. That said, today I have been specifically tasked to share with you one of our very fulfilling experiences in the healthcare domain, where we met with resounding success, largely due to a path breaking collaboration between national and international organizations. Our vision was of eradication of polio. The steering cause of complete freedom from polio was taken up by the Government of India alongside Rotary International and the Aditya Birla Group, WHO, UNICEF, CDC, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation worked ceaselessly to contain the crippling disease. And India today walks on as a polio free country. Fighting polio in India has been a great challenge. Every newborn up until the age of 5 years has to be given the polio drops. Let me give you a feel of our work as its applicability stretches to every field and it relates at several levels to the COVID pandemic. First of all, we collectively designed a polio campaign that was very creative and effective in its message. It was fixated on raising the awareness levels, how we should not allow any child to be crippled by polio. In India, we are faced with complex conditions. We have challenges like a huge population, very high birth rate, and extensive interstate movement of immigrants. So, even if one child misses the polio dose, there is the danger of the virus resurfacing and polio dotting India's horizon again. So, together, we continuously deploy high quality vaccination teams across the breadth and depth of our country while educating parents and ensuring that every newborn until 5 years of age is polio protected. We in the Aditya Birla Group, in the last 5 years alone, have administered 1 billion polio drops in over 75,000 booths. Even as today, India is a polio free country, we cannot be complacent. We continue to endeavor with governments, Pan India, WHO, Rotary International, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to ensure that polio does not resurface. Thanks to this collaboration and the sense of shared purpose, unflinching commitment to a common vision, India remains a polio free country. I am sure your deliberations in Samagam 2020 on collaborations to maximize impact post COVID will help you work out a roadmap engaging foundations, NGOs, corporates, and the government in fruitfully fulfilling the hopes and aspirants of a people not so privileged. And this brings me to the final part of my talk. At a personal level, I would say that we are the authors of the book of our life. We write our own script. In this journey of life, three things stand out. First is all of us individually and with our organizations have experienced the reality of the poverty faced by others in the role that we play in the lives of the underprivileged with the ability to engage, uplift, and empower them. There will be hoops to jump through. Believe that you can rise and you will rise. Recall Helen Keller, who said, and I quote her, keep your face to the sunshine and you cannot see the shadow. Simply put, in life, one has to always stay positive. Second, be kind always. Make compassion your key currency. Way back in the 19th century, the brilliant Russian novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky said, and I quote, compassion is perhaps the greatest emotion that man possesses. So leverage it to the hilt. It's worthwhile to be reflective and ask, what have I done today that makes me feel good? And this happens when you think beyond yourself, which is my third point. When you think beyond yourself, you elevate your status to that of a giver. I want to share with you that giving is in fact living. This is my deep rooted conviction. To me, giving is an expression of joy, love, and caring. It is being useful to those around us and to the world in concrete ways. Giving is like blessing your own life because when you give with an open heart, the good that you do for the other person comes back to you in some form of a blessing. I wish Samagam 2020 all the best and hope it turns out to be a grand success. My congratulations and felicitations to each of you who are here as part of the conclave. Thank you.
My apology. I'm aware that some of you couldn't hear when we started this video and introduced Srimati Birla, but I'll just take half a minute to um, read out her bio. Srimati Rajeshri Birla is a well-known philanthropist as the chairperson of Aditya Birla Center for Community Initiative and Rural Development. Srimati Birla oversees the charity efforts, development activities, and community initiatives of the Aditya Birla Group. She serves the governing boards of many non-profit organizations. She is currently the chairperson of the advisory committee at Habitat for Humanity India Trust, a trustee in Population First and Development Research Foundations, to name a few. In 2011, Government of India honored her with the Padma Bhushan, the third highest civilian award for her service to society. After listening to Srimati Birla, what stayed with me is one phrase: giving is living. It was such a good call to all the philanthropic community. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is Dr. Yasmin Ali Ha. Dr. Yasmin is UNICEF representative to India since July 2017. With over 24 years of service in UNICEF, start her career in Bangladesh, Dr. Yasmin has held leadership roles in the Office of Emergency Program, South Sudan, Ghana, and Sri Lanka. Her leadership and professional experience spans over a wide range of fields, including policy analysis, strategic planning for women's and child rights, child-centric development programming, and large-scale responses for children in humanitarian crisis. Let's hear Dr. Yasmin. Dr. Yasmin, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Kaustav, and good morning to all our participants. I trust you can hear me well. Okay, great. First of all, thank you to Srimati Birla for such an enlightening address to us. And also thank you for inviting us to be part of this, this conclave, the Samagam for 2020, because it's so important that we come together and share some of our learnings and experiences from COVID-19. The pandemic that has started, I'm just trying to fix my all right, great. So it seems to be working better now. Also, I want to, before starting, really appreciate Dr. Rajesh Tandon, founder president of PRIA, and others like Mr. Bagchi, chairman of Odisha Skill Development Authority, and everyone else who will be on the panel. It's really a pleasure for us to have this opportunity to share some of my learnings or our organizational learnings. Now, we know that COVID-19 really started as a health pandemic, and we did not see it as something that affects children gravely. Yet now we see day by day how the pandemic is taking shape and affecting all spheres of public life. And especially when it comes to the life of children, it is being gravely affected. It has morphed into an economic crisis, which has led to unprecedented job losses, declining household incomes, and a manifold increase in debt burden, food insecurity, and challenges in really accessing the key government social benefits due to complete closure of activities in the beginning, some discontinuity of service centers, and of course, an environment which is economically constrained. Now, we all know, and all of us have been part of the development of the sustainable development agenda for the globe. And here, many times, we have looked at really keeping our pledge to leave no one behind. The challenge, of course, is that with the pandemic, the challenge factor of this has increased manifold. Whether we look at the socioeconomic response, and especially when we look at how the recovery will take place. And of course, it's important that we have a vision for it, and we have seen a number of plans have been put in place, a number of efforts are taking place even as we speak. At UNICEF, we especially appreciate the fact that the harmful effects of the pandemic are not really evenly distributed. There are certain groups who are more susceptible to them. Children and women in those families experience the harshest impact of the pandemic and its aftershocks. And we know, as per the global figures, we estimate that between 40 to 60 million children are likely to fall into extreme poverty as a result of the crisis this year. This will add to the 386 million children globally who are estimated in 2019 to be in extreme poverty. So we have a huge challenge. We all know that about 188 countries around the world have imposed countrywide school closures, and this has affected more than 1.5 billion children and young people. These measures definitely, they have been necessary, yet they have resulted in an even wider gap in students' learning outcomes, in access to education, and especially in countries like here where there is already a pre-existing digital divide that excludes children, especially girls, from accessing solutions that have been put in place for remote learning. And it is expected that this could result in hundreds of thousands of children either not coming back to school or, in fact, even if we look at the health outcomes, that due to the disruption of services, if we had not put in place quick steps to resume these services, an additional hundreds of thousands of children would have died from preventable causes. So really, this pandemic has brought about a situation where not just is the challenge of achieving the SDGs being affected, the reality of us slipping further behind in that achievement is real. As economic activities restart, the low level of consumption and investment is still clear. And vulnerable families who are significantly dependent, especially on the informal sector, in seasonal employment, in cross-border trade and hawking, and especially those who migrate to cities in search of jobs and live in informal settlings, have been the hardest hit. In UNICEF, we conducted a community-based monitoring, which has shown that livelihoods and employment among marginalized populations could take a long time to return even to the pre-COVID situation. We've seen that approximately 3/4 of main wage earners and families reported that their monthly income is now lower than pre-lockdown, and just 15% stated that it is the same as before lockdown. Now, we are continuing to share the findings of these community-based monitoring with the various ministries, with the various local authorities, and with Niti Aayog, because it's really important that we act on these findings, on what we hear from people. Some of the major aftershocks of the pandemic that could affect the lives of children for a long time include, of course, on one hand, the access to critical health services due to engagement of the service providers in COVID prevention and care services. We anticipate that there is a stronger risk of increased malnutrition among children and adolescents due to either reduced services or due to the fact that schools are closed, and even the midday meal that they had access to is not all accessible to all children, even though we have seen local governments taking steps to look at whether the ration is provided to them at home or not. The bigger crisis we all are worried about is, of course, the learning crisis, because we know it has been a crisis even before the pandemic. So it's really critical in this context to look at ways and means, and in all our strategies for recovery, keep a special lens on children, especially on the girl child, so that they are protected from the negative impact of the pandemic. UNICEF has been advocating with state governments to continue implementation of cash transfer programs for girls, especially those that are linked to their going to school or being in learning. And a good example we see is, of course, the support continuation to the Konyashri cash transfer program in West Bengal. With Our support to community-based monitoring, which really would not have been possible without NGOs who have direct access and contact to community members, has been crucial for us to keep an eye on whether they are able to access services or not. And we saw from that that while some services at health centers and Anganwadi centers have improved, in comparison to the time of the lockdown in April, May, still we haven't reached the full scale of operation. About 60% of pregnant women reported that Anganwadi centers are providing services to women and children. 74% of women told us that they received take-home rations last month. And 87% of them are especially in the rural areas. But hot cooked meals and preschool education services through ICDS still has not reached the level that is really needed. And so now more than ever, in the context of the pandemic and associated constraints on mobility, there is need for a stronger bottom-up process of governance at the local level, really to see are the relief and rebuilding measures reaching those who need it the most. UNICEF is proud to be partnering with Pradhan in building a collaborative framework for delivery of social protection programs by women's self-help groups to come up with a new model of inclusive grassroots level governance. So this is something we're really excited about. The goal of this program is to build a proof of concept of the efficacy of self-help group collectives and GPs collaborating with each other and government-line departments to improve the delivery of social protection programs to marginalized rural communities in Jharkhand and in Odisha. Focus will be on schemes that have direct implication on the welfare of women and the girl children. So it's really important that we keep this focus. And the idea is to create a prototype for SHG collectives, Gram Panchayat collaboration, which can then trigger an enhanced access to various government schemes for the vulnerable households and specific actions for pregnant women, lactating mothers, and adolescent girls. Now, the community-based monitoring that we have been conducting has pointed to the fact that many children are being compelled to join child labor and will be subjected to child marriage, most likely never to return to school. 2 out of 5 volunteers reported that children in their habitation are engaged as paid worker or they have been pushed into child labor. The situation is similar in both rural and urban areas. So what we need is specific socioeconomic programs that are adequate and effective in keeping children, especially girls, in school, retained in learning, and out of harmful practices like child labor and child marriage. So in the context of child labor, a good example is the social protection program that we are supporting in Uttar Pradesh to prevent child labor as a result of the pandemic. The Bal Shramik Vidyan Yojana is a unique cash transfer scheme in UP, which aims to bring back child laborers to school with sustained support. And apart from giving the cash assistance, families are supported with a bundle of other social protection schemes so that they don't revert back due to economic constraints. In addition to supporting the design of the cash transfer, we have advocated and supported fast-track enrollment of eligible children for this scheme as part of the package offered to returning migrants and unorganized sector. And we have been working with volunteers in 20 districts to support the documentation and application to access for these schemes, because it does require a degree of hand holding. We hope that this is going to reach more than 600,000 migrant workers and their families, workers who are involved in building construction and the unorganized sector. We estimate that more than 5,000 child labor will move into the scheme and then have access to greater support. So, when we look at addressing the development challenges and the SDGs going forward, it's really important that we keep this special attention by government at all levels, at the state level, national level, and the local level, and all of us in our own organizations and in our sphere of influence. We know the government's efforts, we know what challenges the government is facing. We know the world economy is going to be suffering. Still, this pushes us, especially at a time when resources are limited, to really focus our efforts and our resources on proven solutions for children. It's important that while estimating the resource requirement, that we really look at the new parameters, especially what is needed to be refocused and reimagined in this during and after the pandemic. So while we're looking at, hopefully we will see the same level of budget allocation, there will need to be more efficiency in how we spend the money. And this brings me to considering that the Gram Panchayat needs to be seen as a building block of governance. And we will be working with them very closely to see how CSO partners, NGOs, SHGs come together to enhance their capacity. On behalf of UNICEF, I want to assure you that we believe in this collaboration. We believe there's a need to adopt an integrated approach to make our recovery inclusive and faster. And we look forward to working with all of you much closer in this. Thank you very much, and let's keep our focus on children.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yasmin. So many messages coming out from your speech. I think emphasizing on community-based monitoring, focusing on children, especially girls, negatively affected by COVID, the experimentation of working with self-help groups, panchayats, and local line departments to access schemes for lactating mothers and children, and the need for coordination between local, state, and national government. All these are so important points. Thank you so much for bringing these messages. Our next speaker is Sri Subroto Bagchi. Subroto Bagchi is the chairman of Odisha Skill Development Authority in the rank and status of a cabinet minister. He was a co-founder of Mindtree, where he was executive chairman before joining the government. Mindtree is a leading IT service company which has built, among its many other credits, the Aadhaar platform. Sri Bagchi has been a best-selling author on management subjects. Mr. Bagchi, this is your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Shri Kostab Bandyopadhyay, Srimati Birla, Dr. Yasmin Haq, Dr. Rajesh Tandon. I do not know if Shri Amitabh Kant ji is on the call, but if he is not there, I still remember and regards to him. And Shri Jagadananda, our very own, who asked that I come and speak to all of you today. Thank you very much for giving me the honor of addressing Samagam's 2020 conclave. It brings in its fold one of the best networks of civil society organizations in the country. I'm particularly delighted that we are here to facilitate a conversation on the progress of the sustainable development goals. Collaboration between government, businesses, and the civil society. When I read the program outline, I was very happy with the way the organizers have articulated the key issue for all of us to dwell on. And that was, what will we learn from the pandemic as the post-COVID world unfolds? Will we move on from the new spirit of collaboration and settle back into the old ways of seeking to individually move faster than go farther? These are wonderful thoughts. And these raise very deep and relevant questions to our work today. We are here to discuss the SDGs, which are very specific and zoomed in. As we do that, I encourage us to keep the big picture in our head. Let everything we discuss in the next 2 days be in big picture. And what is that big picture? I believe in the shadow lines of COVID-19. It is about worker wages and worker housing. Let me share with you why and how these issues are foundational to our work in this conclave. The human disaster wrought by COVID-19 points to the underbelly of our collective failure. Mass migration took place in the days and months following the lockdown was nothing short of a refugee crisis of historical proportion. Yet, no one was willing to call it that. I want to repeat, yes, it was a refugee crisis. But as a nation, we have already forgotten the images of men, women, and babies fleeing their workplace, walking, cycling, hitchhiking, riding trucks with nothing more than a backpack and a bundle of cloth, getting hounded, insulted, attacked, and rejected along the way, sometimes delivering babies, sometimes dying unaccounted, and sometimes being subject to dousing with insecticide and disinfectants while crossing into their own states. As we are sinking into a state of selective memory, we are once again moving on from two issues always been marginalized. One, wages we pay to our workers, and related to that, the housing they can afford in their chosen place of work. The fundamental difference between all of us gathered this morning and those who reverse migrated in distress is this basic fact. When the lockdown was announced, you and I stayed on where we did because we had a place to stay, because we could. Refugees of COVID-19 could not afford to pay for housing, even if there was housing to be had. Many places, the housing meant sleeping on the floor of an undocumented factory that closed down. They lost their livelihoods, and along with that, the ability to stay in the place of their work. Sometimes the local people turned suspicious that these were the people who would spread COVID. In many migrants were persecuted. These people didn't even know the meaning of a virus. They were gripped with fear and danger from fellow man. They had to flee. This disaster has impacted millions of Indians who have the same right to this land that we call our own. The telling images of people exhausted, sleeping on a railway track, run over by a train, the picture of hordes of Pakistanis being doused in insecticide while crossing over to their own state, the pictures of women delivering babies on Shramik Express trains, of people killed in tractor-trailer accidents, and the haunting image of a young girl who carried her ailing father on a bicycle for 1,200 kilometers have a deep, unsolved, shameful narrative of two things. Firstly, we do not pay our sustainable wages. Secondly, we do not concern ourselves with where they live and how they live. Talking about wages, we accept the term minimum wage. When it comes to them, why minimum? Why not fair? Why not reasonable? Why not decent? Why not human? How many of us would like to be paid minimum wages? How likely are we to feel proud if our children came to report to us just landed a minimum wage job? With this minimum wage for our maximum people, worker housing conveniently becomes not our, but their problem. Minimum, ladies and gentlemen, is not really an amount. Minimum is a mindset. The work that we do today and tomorrow at this conclave, and the work we continue to do thereafter, must be informed in a sense of magnanimity, of maximalism, of generosity, more than minimum. Friends, India will be 75 in a matter of 2 more years, independent India that is. We had a long time to set our house in order, set our ambition right, and for all that we need benchmarks. Without the benchmark, we can be falsely self-congratulating. We can wallow in comfortable mediocrity. But acknowledging and accepting a benchmark is an act of courage. Today, let me offer you one of the many possible benchmarks that we can set for our work at this conclave. In 1996, I was sent to Japan to receive training in total quality management by Wipro chairman Azim Premji. As part of the training, I visited many Japanese factories, and what struck me was that most Japanese manufacturers largely employed a workforce consisting of high school pass-outs. This was a far cry, of course, from the 1950s, when they were rising from the ashes with a largely illiterate workforce who were paddy-filled workers before they came to a factory. From Toyota to Toto, all the world-class manufacturing companies that I visited at the entry levels employed youth fresh from high school. And these workers looked healthy, clean, well, and confident. I was curious to know their wage structure. Everywhere I went, I would ask the host company how much money were they paid. But more importantly, I wanted to know what was the ratio between how much these workers were paid in comparison to the general manager or the head of the plant. Everywhere I went, I learned that the ratio of earning between an entry-level worker and the head of the plant was 1:6. Can you guess what that ratio is in our country? In India, it might well be 1 to the ratio of infinity. If today, a young man who has finished his ITI education and starts a career in an auto plant would at best be making 12,000 rupees a month, and the general manager of that plant would probably be making more than 3 lakhs a month, maybe even more. That ratio gets worse if the worker is someone who is conveniently labeled as unskilled or competence, in which case the young person would probably get less than rupees 8,000 a month and would not be even on the payrolls of the company that he or she works for. Where can people live when they earn 8,000, 10,000, or 15,000 rupees in a metropolitan city? They must live in slums. And when virus and violence hit, they must run from their slums. In 2016, I visited a skill development center in Odisha that was training dropouts in making leather products. With the plan that they could work at a leather park in Haryana, I decided to visit the leather park to see the working condition that awaited the trainees from Odisha. The management at the establishment was quite perplexed to see me. They had no affinity towards the workers from Odisha because they were not their workers. They were employed by labor contractors, and thus the employer was not invested in them and their well-being as long as they simply at the factory gate. After visiting the factory, I went to see the place where the workers lived. In one of those places, there were more than 150 men and women cramped in a 3-story building, which was no bigger than 15,000 square feet. In that building, I met with a group of young women workers about the challenges. I was discussing with them the challenges of leaving home thousands of kilometers away in search of work in an alien land. I was expecting to hear from them about of work, the difficulty of food, about cultural differences, and of course, safety. Instead, they told me the biggest challenge for them was drinking water. In Bahadurgarh, the drinking water they got was from bore wells that poured out hard, putrid water. Back in the villages where they came from, they did not have enough to eat, but the water was drinkable. Here, they had food, but the water was not drinkable. The wage disparity and dismal work situation in our country are conveniently forgotten at all levels. I want to ask ourselves a hard question. Would the refugee crisis of 2020 have happened in India if India did not have wage disparity? And would people have fled the cities in the aftermath of the lockdown if they had humane housing in the place of their work? Many of us had a sibling, a cousin, a child living in Mumbai, Delhi, Chennai, Bangalore when the lockdown happened. But they stayed put. It was not a humanitarian crisis for them. It is true that some did come back to their hometowns after a few weeks, but even that was not an act of desperation, unlike the millions who overnight became refugees in their own country. They are putting themselves in harm's way, making a long, hazardous trek back in search of security to return to a land that wasn't always happy to see them because they were invariably suspecting the virus back to the village. Friends, nearly 75 years after independence, we have many things to congratulate ourselves. But unfortunately, the things we can claim credit for mostly impact and stop with the urban rich and at best the middle class Indian. 94% of Indians work in the informal sector. That phrase sanitizes many inconvenient things. For example, informal sector means this work in cash. Most are seasonally employed. They have no healthcare or social security. And because they work in small, undocumented places, no one really is invested in the human capital development of these people. These are the people, whether they're migrant or not, who must become refugees in their own land when a disaster like COVID-19 strikes. We have had 75 years to engineer a nation that would not make its own people flee from place to fear and desperation. Yet it happened. And in it is painted the report card of every politician, every bureaucrat, every businessman, and every educated person who has benefited from being an Indian. The time has come to ask ourselves, can we make a significant departure from this past? Can we build another India that would be 25 years, and whether 25 years would be good enough to build that India? Can we fix the wage disparity and the housing issue in the next 25 years to make the country's worker as capable and cared for as his or her counterpart in the developed world? History bears testimony to such transformation. Japan achieved it in roughly 25 years. So did Singapore. The worker in Japan in 1950s was an illiterate farmhand, as I told you a little earlier. And in 1980s, CEOs of global companies, particularly from the West, started looking at the same Japanese worker as an icon. With dialogue over debate, with alignment over expediency, India at 100 can be a very different nation, but that will require a massive shift from the way we have looked at the issue of development. It is time to talk about ideas like doubling the earning potential of every worker in India across sectors. It is time to say, not have the best worker housing in the world, not further away from the farthest metro station, but in the vicinity of power so that motorcades can go past without having to look away. Due to the many recent global dynamic, we heard the rallying cry to create an Atmanirbhar Bharat. In today's world, Atmanirbhar Bharat, from space to defense, from farm to factory, cannot be built on an ill-fed, ill-clad, anxious, afraid. The edifice of self-reliance requires the sinews of a strong workforce. Our workers are not the shadow, they are the light. Friends, before I say goodbye for now, I want to remind us that the Sustainable Development Goals were created to get leaders to understand what should be the priority. what is truly relevant, and what is fundamental to life and living. They're designed to give us a shared vision, work for us in government, business, and social sectors to build alignment. The Sustainable Development Goals were not meant to be a common minimum program. They're not meant for us to move people from poverty to presentable poverty. It is time to recognize the COVID-19 triggered mass exodus as the metaphoric point of departure for a nation that must articulate an aspiration of arrival, one that makes your and my life worthy of the place that we are occupying today. I wish all of you all the very best for the proceedings for the next 2 days. As you delve into details, as you dive deep into the work of developing and implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, I hope you will remember to step back and look at the big picture that I talked about, to move your mind from minimalism to maximalism. Your work and beyond has the potential to change the way generations of Indians live and work. Thank you in advance for everything that you are set out to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bakchi. It was such a powerful thought. Going beyond the concept of minimum to excel, from minimalism to maximalism. Powerful thought. Thank you so much. Let us move to the next segment of our program. Our next speaker is Dr. Rajesh Tandon. Dr. Rajesh Tandon is the founder president of Participatory Research in Asia, as we call it PRIA, a global research and training center on participatory research. Dr. Tandon was the founding chair of Civicus, a global alliance of civil society organizations and international forum for capacity building. Since 2012, Dr. Tandon is UNESCO co-chair on social responsibility in higher education. He currently serves as the chairperson of Forum for India's Development Cooperation, a partnership platform with the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. Dr. Tandon, you are most welcome.
Thank you, Kaustav. Wonderful highlights of the plight of minimum wage and unskilled blue-collar worker by Subratoji, and Yasmin's erudite appeal to focus on children, but focus on them in a different way than just providing some service. I'm delighted to be a part of this session, which began with Srimati Birla ji, and learned about the work that they are doing. In preparation for this session today, I was thinking about where I am, where I came from, and how did this happen. Let me tell you a small story. When I was when I finished my MBA from Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta, and was offered a lecturership in the institution, I was encouraged to do PhD in management. But during Institute of Management time in Calcutta, I had developed deeper interest in organizational challenges, including, even then I wrote a paper on management of primary education in India in 1972. I went to US to Case Western Reserve to do a PhD in program on organizational behavior. But I wanted to do my fieldwork in India. Emergency was declared in India, and I came back and through fortuitous circumstances landed up in the Kherwada block of Udaipur district of southern Rajasthan, where then Bhai Sahab, Dr. Mohan Sinha Mehta, told me, you want to do something about rural development, go and look there. My research question was, how come Government of India's rural development programs do not reach those who are far away, marginalized, and distant? and I worked over the next 1 year pretending to do my PhD and collect data for the same with 25 tribal villages of that block. I came back and wrote about the need for bottom up, participatory, and empowering approach to development, not just top down, uniform, one size fits all to development. I went back to teach at IIM Calcutta, but my heart wasn't there. I realized that I could make some small contribution to improve the lives of these people, though not as a farmer, but more as somebody who had a training of mind during 5 years of IIT Kanpur, 2 years of management, and some PhD time. And so, after leaving IIM Calcutta job and National Labour Institute job in 1980-81, I began to set up PRIA along with others. At that time, I looked around various government schemes and programs. I looked around development theory being talked about, and I didn't find enough emphasis on bottom-up, participatory, locally led development, which respected local knowledge, which built local capacity and leadership, and which valued local collaborative design of development solutions. So over the next 10, 15 years, that is what I devoted myself to. Priya began to do this kind of work in many different fields. But in the process, I discovered that there were many thousands like me, and I wasn't alone. There are many who had been devoting themselves to improving the lives of the people, and in those days, we were called voluntary organizations. The phraseology of civil society had not been a popular discourse till 1991-92. But there were a large number of young people, men and women, medical doctors, engineers, people from nursing profession, from law, who dedicated themselves in one small area somewhere of their liking to support those who were excluded, who were not being able to improve their lives. They had enormous commitment and passion. So very soon I realized that what brought me to this was not a job. I didn't come to do a job. Neither I came to be a professional, because a large number of community organizers, barely 8th grade pass, were exceptional professionals if you look at community organizing as a profession. A large number of literacy workers with whom I worked in many states in the early 80s were literacy workers with exceptional professionalism because they devoted themselves to this cause. They may lack some competence which can be built, but they were real professionals. And so over these years, over these 40 years, there is now, I'm proud to say, an increasing biradari of young people who want to make a contribution to improve the society in the ways in which my previous speakers have talked about, in the ways in which Yasmin and Subrato and Srimati Birlaji spoke. So how do they come and do this? What happens when they start working like this? Many people did not want to work in the government. Many left corporate jobs or did not enter into them because they made a choice. And it is important for us to be able to stand up to that choice. Each choice we make in life has ups and downs. But each of us would like to be respected for the choice we make. So those of us who work in the civil society sector, who work in the non-governmental sector, who work in voluntary sector, those who work outside government, outside business, also need respect. So what has happened to this? I went to IIT Kanpur on 40th reunion of my batch. And because I was the general secretary of the union when I was at IIT, a professor got up and said, this batch is known as Rajesh Tandon's batch. But in the evening, informally, many of my batchmates asked me, so Rajesh, what else did you do? What else did you do? Ah, you do. That's all you did? And many of them have since then become philanthropists. They've made a lot of money, many in Silicon Valley. And they give to good causes. But they became philanthropists after they'd made money. So that's why they asked the question, that's all you did? What else did you do? I want to tell you the story of our experience in working together with the government over the last 40 years. I recall that in 1985-86, when the new government of late Sri Rajiv Gandhi came to power, Wasteland Development Board was set up with Kamla Chaudhary, late Kamla Chaudhary, as the first vice chair. It was commonplace for people working in social forestry, wasteland development, rural development, tribal development. It was commonplace for all of us to be invited to regular consultations in framing policies and programs of wasteland development, including in designing practical solutions on the ground. I remember in 1986, the National Education Policy was being reviewed. And again, a similar process was happening. In 1995, when the government of late Sri Narasimha Rao came to power, similar consultations happened with the leadership of the Secretary to the Prime Minister, Cabinet Secretary, defining programs and protocols of cooperation and sharing platforms with mutual respect. I recall April 2002, when the then Planning Commission, organized a program of partnership with voluntary organizations in Vigyan Bhavan, and I shared the platform with late Sri Atal Bihari Vajpayee. And we both talked about sharing common purpose, though choosing different routes. We did not want to be a political party, and neither Atal Bihari ji wanted to be a voluntary organization. But the desire to work together, despite our differences, was explicit, manifested, practical. A similar experience happened during the time when Sri Mani Shankar Iyer became the Minister for Panchayati Raj in 2004. Many people do not know, but the annual reports of the ministry for first 3 years used to be written by many of us to support the government because it lacked capacities, documentation, data, but our names never appeared on it because that did not matter. That did not matter. What mattered was our knowledge, our expertise was respected and valued, and we were treated as equals. We were not as powerful. We did not have that large room that the minister had. Or when Dugandarji was in Planning Commission, we sat together to design programs for empowering panchayats. But those programs were designed on the basis of local knowledge that several hundred voluntary organizations had produced. I'm sharing this to you because when we talk about collaboration, let us not forget that we are dissimilar types. Government is government, duly elected democratically, run by political leaders and a large number of appointed officials. Business runs for profit, legitimately so, and must do so. We in the civil society operate on slightly different principle. We operate on principle of empowering the excluded. We operate on the principle of certain values. Yesterday was a Constitution Day. I was delighted that our president read out the preamble of the Constitution. I'm sure you all remember that preamble. Equality, justice, fraternity. So that's what inspired us, continues to inspire us. We bring to the table of collaboration our assets, social capital, local connectedness, relationships of trust in the community. Business brings technology, finances, managerial expertise. Government builds policies, laws, public investment. We have different sets of assets when we come together. And when those assets converge, we produce the best solutions. We produce the best solutions of the type Srimati Birla mentioned or Yasmin was aiming at. But we also come together and raise questions of each other. Subrata raised questions about migrant labor. That question about migrant labor, Subrata, should also be asked of each and every employer. And our co-sponsors of this conference, FICCI, and other associations should be asking of their employers. When civil society, therefore, talks about migrant labor, it will raise questions about accountability of employers, household employers to corporate employers. And that question is legitimate. It is not intended to harass or intimidate. It is only to bring a particular experience or a point of view to the table. I remember in conversations during IRDP program in late 1980s, when for a brief period of time, our exceptional leaders, including Ilaben and late Sri L.C. Jain, were members of the Planning Commission, we sat together to design a program of bottom-up reporting of whether services had reached the poor or the vulnerable. Sort of whether the Antyodaya was working in practice on the ground. And those were the pre-technology app or mobile app days. I'm talking about late 80s. And one of the members around the table who came from a southern state, which was doing very well in the eyes of the Planning Commission, made a joke. He said that if we compile all the data that has been provided by the state government, he was referring to his state, for digging wells, every person of the state would be inside the well because the entire land would have been covered by well. Fake well, paper well. Now, to raise question about this is our responsibility. It's our duty. We are accountable to community to bring such questions to the table. And they are inconvenient questions. They are difficult questions. So when we want to collaborate, let us not assume that everybody will agree on everything. There is a shared purpose. We have different cultures, different styles, different expertise, different resources we bring to collaboration. And therefore, we must have the capacity. I would say we must have the stomach, or a more modern word, resilience, to be able to accept questions from each other, to raise questions about our collaboration, and to resolve them with mutual respect and a spirit of collaboration. This has become a serious problem. In the days when I am reaching the end of my long journey, I am pained to say that that trust, that respect for the work that my Biradari does, my fraternity does, has disappeared. There were occasions in the past we never had funding. There were occasions in the past we lacked resources. There were occasions in the past we could not pay even meager salaries to our community organizers. But we carried on. We carried on because we felt encouraged, we felt recognized, and we felt trusted and valued by government. Business was not so much in the play. Business came into play more in the last decade with CSR and other trends. But business was in our eyesight. Today, Subrato gave a wonderful example of what happened to the workers, our minimum wage mindset, who have been refugees from their own homes. Let me remind all of you that the same fate applies to 100 million tribals in this country, 7.5% of our population, who over the last 60, 70 years have been displaced repeatedly, repeatedly. And many of them have turned into beggars. People with self-respect, with local knowledge, with local wisdom, people whose ecological sense is today seen as resilience for climate change. Those people were displaced repeatedly, and when civil society raised questions, we were labeled as anti-national. There are many times when people in the world of business who are involved in making money or profit also are cheating. But nobody equates Mindtree, a respectable organization founded by a person of the stature of Subrata. Nobody equates Mindtree with those digital thieves operating out of Jamtara district of Jharkhand. Nobody labels them together. Likewise, as Srimati Birla was saying, nobody equates Birla Empire with fly-by-night business operators who cheat their workers and their customers repeatedly. I wish all of you collaborators from the government, from the media, from the business world would make that discretion when you label all civil society, all NGOs, all of us as a bunch of self-serving thieves. It pains me. It pains me after 40 years of my work. And I'm not alone. I'm talking on behalf of thousands like us. That today we do not receive the respect that we used to get earlier. We never had big resources. We never had big offices. We never had big salaries. We have had the occasion when senior IAS officers have come on sabbatical for 5 years and worked in Priya. And their salary, even at that time, was 3 times my salary. Because we worked on trust, mutual respect. We valued their expertise and they valued our expertise. So, voluntary organizations, civil society, community organizations, those of us who did not make a career inside the government or in the world of business, whatever name you give us, we are not cheap, low-cost doers. We also have a mind of our own, expertise of our own. We are not merely service providers of programs designed by either CSR or Niti Aayog. We also have our expertise and mind to give inputs in the design of those programs and disagree in the design. And we are not only a place to provide certificates for internship of middle class and upper middle class boys and girls, which has become a fashion in the last decade. We are more than that. So I, on behalf of my fraternity, appeal to you to look at this collaboration from the principle of mutual trust. We do not undermine the role of business to make profit. Legitimate profit, treating its customers, employers, and the ecology within the law and also with sustainability. We do not dispute legitimately elected governments and their appointed officials to play the role that they are playing. We expect similar treatment. We expect to be respected for our expertise and to be trusted that when we speak about a particular issue or we bring uncomfortable information from the field to a meeting, we are doing it in the interest of ensuring that our programs and policies are implemented with the purpose and the money that is invested is utilized most efficiently. I think if we can recalibrate our relationships, practical collaborative steps can follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tandon, for reminding us the role of civil society organizations and that of other actors. And in playing that role, how mutual respect and trust on an ongoing basis, even among the dissimilar others, is so critical. And civil society's ability to question, to bring issues which matters to the most marginalized. Thank you so much for reminding those powerful thoughts. Colleagues, our next speaker is Shri Amitabh Kant. As I can see, and you also can see, I can see the chair. We'll invite him in a moment. I just got a chat message from his office that he is here. So I'll just wait for a moment. Well, may I request all of you to take off your eyes for a moment just to give some rest, and I'll sort of let you know as soon as he sits on that chair. Just give us a moment. Thank you. Well, friends, since we are waiting for Mr. Kant to join the discussion, let me take this opportunity to invite a couple of comments from Mr. Bagchi and Dr. Tandon. Just one question that I had for Mr. Bagchi. Then you have beautifully pointed out going from minimalism to maximalism.
Sir,
Yes.
Mr. Kant is busy on phone call with PM in 5 minutes.
Okay, we'll wait for 5 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. So what could be the roadmap, Mr. Bagchi, from going from minimalism to the maximalism? So is there any, other than the changing mindset, what concretely can be done to achieve this? Mr. Bagchi?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I think the key issue is to start by recognizing that we got a problem here. We have very smart people in the system. System, I mean the whole system. The system the way Rajesh ji intends it to be. So there are smart people in politics, there are smart people in the bureaucracy, there are smart economists, there are very smart civil society organizations. We have to we will figure out and find a solution. I'm not here to tell you that you need to do these 4 things, but we have to say that this is a critical thing to be addressed, and the time frame in which it needs to be addressed. If we do that, if we start with that premise, it is absolutely possible to do it. And government, it is the same government that has taken the maximalist view of things many times over and over and over again. If the government says that yes, worker housing is a priority, if the government says that, look, raising the so-called minimum wage by 15 rupees, 20 rupees, 500 rupees is not what it is. See, government today is doubling farm income. We should be actually doing that because it has got cascading effect, but we should be talking about doubling worker income across all sectors. So if we recognize it to be an important issue, everything else will fall in place, because then we'll fix the policy, we'll create the budget, we'll seek the kind of public-private partnership to make it happen, and so on and so forth. So for a moment, let me not clarify the thing by saying these are the 4 things that need to be done. Again, I would like to tell you this, that 1965 is when Singapore actually got freedom, and at that time it was little more than a ghetto. But Singapore consistently has paid attention to things like worker housing. So today a 5-star complex and a super beautiful office complex, you also see the worker housing. And what makes Singapore Singapore is the fact that the plumber and the prime minister have access to the same water and the same electricity, same quality of electricity. So somebody has to say that this needs to be done. I think it is the political leadership that must say that this is critical and this needs to be done.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bagchi, for this reflection. I'm delighted that Sri Amitabh Kantji has joined us. Let me introduce Sri Amitabh Kant. Sri Amitabh Kant is the CEO of National Institution for Transforming India, Niti Aayog, as we know it. He joined Indian Administrative Service in 1980 in the state of Kerala. Sri Kant has been a key driver of the Make in India, Startup India, Incredible India, and God's Own Country initiatives. In his capacity as Secretary, Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion, Government of India, he vigorously drove the Ease of Doing Business initiative and ranking of states on outcome parameters. A career spanning over 4 decades, he has handled many responsibilities in the state and national governments. Mr. Kant has been the recipient of numerous distinguished awards, including Economic Times Policy Change Agent of the Year Award, the Bloomberg TV Personality of the Year Award, the NDTV Administrator of the Year Award, and Distinguished Fellowship of the Institute of Directors. Mr. Kant, it's our honor, and I'm very delighted to welcome you in the keynote session 1.
Distinguished guests, Mr. Bagchi, Mr. Tandon, Mr. Bandyopadhyay, ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a great honor for me to be delivering this keynote address at this very august gathering of stakeholders across government, business, and civil society. The title of this conclave, Samagam, means coming together. This could not be more apt given the events that have unfolded as the year has gone on. It is only through partnerships will we realize the ambitious goals we have set out for, be they on economic growth, sustainable development, or climate change. Government, business, and civil society can and must work together to achieve the shared vision of a new India. Given their deep connect with spatial and sectoral issues, NGOs, civil society, amongst others, emerge as natural partners. The COVID-19 pandemic is an opportunity to evaluate the status quo, challenge the assumptions of business as usual, and take advantage of new opportunities. During the early stages of the lockdown, the government constituted several empowered groups, and I was heading the Empowered Group 6, whose objective was to galvanize civil society organizations, NGOs, development partners, industry partners, and industrial organizations to ramp up response to the COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, this empowered group was itself a partnership, as the members were from 8 different organizations. 92,000 civil society organizations, NGOs, were galvanized, and their expertise in key social sectors such as nutrition, health, sanitation, education, and community outreach were effectively leveraged. These NGOs, CSOs assisted district administrations in identifying hotspots and deputing volunteers, delivering essential services to the vulnerable, and in creating awareness about prevention, social distancing, and isolation. As a result, community kitchens were set up, shelter provided to homeless, and daily wages. Support for distribution of PPE and protective provisions and setting up of health camps were also provided. NGOs were critical in developing communication strategies in different vernaculars, which went a long way towards spreading awareness about the symptoms, the principles of prevention amongst our population. We also worked with industry associations to address problems being faced by the industry. The coalitions built by industry organizations brought people together, identified problems at multiple levels, channelized ideas and solutions, and facilitated innovations. I think Arogya Setu is another example of a massive success born out of partnerships. We worked in partnership with the private sector on this. Since its launch on 2nd April 2020, the app has seen more than over 140 million registrations. It became the fastest mobile app to reach 50 million users globally and one of the fastest entrants to the 100 million club. It has had a huge impact when compared to all other COVID-19 contact tracing and self-assessment tools combined globally. The Arogya Setu team has predicted more than 3,500 hotspots across the country. Or let us take the case of PPE kits and ventilators. Before the pandemic, India imported most of what we needed, with domestic production close to negligible. The private sector showed a high degree of adaptability, going from producing 0 PPE kit and ventilators to over 450,000 PPE kits a day. Over 6,000 companies were certified to make PPE kits. In the case of ventilators, before the pandemic, 75 to 80% of India's ventilators were being imported. Now, close to 95% of domestic demand is being met by local production. And in August, the government actually lifted the ban on exports of ventilators, as domestic industry was producing not just enough for our own needs, but global markets as well. This shows the power of collaborations in achieving our shared goals. Even before the pandemic, Niti Aayog has been constructively engaging with the civil society, NGOs, amongst others. Perhaps the best example comes from the Aspirational District Program, where we have partnered with several agencies to data validation purposes, amongst others, to lift people above the poverty line. These are some of the most backward districts of India. We don't call them backward, we call them the aspirational districts of India. They're extremely far-flung, they're extremely complex, and there are huge vacancies of teachers, medical staff, and so on. We have partnered with organizations such as Startup Trust, Piramal Foundation, Gates Foundation, ID Insight in collection and validation of data points. Third-party validation of data establishes the credibility and integrity of the data collected. By partnering these organizations with the district administration, this will also have the knock-on effects of upgrading the skills of the district administration in a range of areas. We have also initiated the transformation of Aspirational District Fellowship, where talented young professionals with domain expertise are placed with the district administration in left-wing extremist affected districts. It is my strong belief that without improvement in health, education, and nutrition, it will not be possible for India to grow on a sustained basis over a long period of time. And therefore, out of the 42 indicators that we have for the aspirational districts, our focus is essentially on these areas of social transformation. If we are able to transform these districts, in the next 3 to 5 years' time, India's growth story will be a very different story. We'll have growth with social equity. And I think these districts will then pose a challenge to many of the advanced districts. I think it is important that these districts actually become the key drivers of change in India. Just to give you example, our focus has been on health, nutrition, and education outcomes. These are areas where we have our collaborations with the NGOs have yielded very significant results and policy directions for the government to implement. Just to give you example, we work with the Akshay Patra Foundation, which is the world's largest school meal program. It has made a huge difference in many of these aspirational districts. There are many areas that have, however, so far remained untapped. I'm sure that through this conclave, we'll be able to identify many more such areas of collaboration to achieve India's development goals. Also, our belief is that we need essentially the recovery of our economy. We need to work in partnership with many of our civil society organizations for our economy to recover in a big way. The government has taken the initiative of institutionalizing many reforms, especially in the agriculture sector, bringing the reforms carried out in a range of areas, from mining to coal to labor, but bringing these reforms to the doorsteps of the common citizen is the challenge we face. I believe the civil society, NGO, industry partners, development partners can have a huge role to play in this regard. Aggregating, collectivizing farmers through farmer-producer organizations has been a policy suggestion that has been getting increased traction over the past few years. Organizing farmers through FPCs, FPOs increases their bargaining power. Similarly, organizing farmers allows for the dissemination of farming best practices to spread quickly, leading to lower input costs and better environmental outcomes. Organizing farmers into FPCs, FPOs, and connecting them to terminal markets is an important area for collaboration between the government and civil society. Niti Aayog actually has been working on devising roadmaps for the digital transformation of sectors previously untapped, such as agriculture and other areas such as logistics, healthcare, education, amongst others. Collaboration with the civil society, NGOs, will be critical in ensuring that these technology interventions are utilized by those who most need it. The inherent advantages civil society and NGOs possess to communicate, train, and mentor people needs to be leveraged to achieve the goals of public policy. These are just some examples of collaborative partnerships. I'm sure that this conclave will throw up many such avenues for collaborations which can be discovered. The challenges that India faces are stark but insurmountable. We must embrace this newfound spirit of collaboration and use it to drive transformational change in India in the coming years. I'm sure that this conclave will throw up many new areas which can be identified for collaboration and a roadmap for their execution be drawn out. I look forward to receiving the recommendations, and Niti Aayog will be very happy to work in partnership with all of you. It is only through collaborations can we achieve our ambitious goals in relation to economic growth, sustainability, and inequality. I think without a collaborative partnership, it will not be possible for India to have both growth and equity. I thank Pradhan again for giving me this opportunity to deliver the keynote address at this August gathering. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to have been a part of this program.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kant. And several points that you have mentioned are so pertinent and important for us. Of course, improving and focusing on health, nutrition, and education for social transformation in India, particularly in the aspirational districts, is so critical. The use of digital technology and the advantage that civil society organizations have and how we can harvest that advantageous position of civil society. We are very hopeful that by end of this deliberation, we should be able to bring out a roadmap and specific areas for collaboration between the Niti Aayog and the government as a whole, with the civil society organizations and business says as well. So thank you so much. I would like to thank all the panelists who have joined this session. It was wonderful to hear all of your thoughts. A special thank to Srimati Rajeshri Birla, who could not join in person, but shared her recorded video. Dr. Yasmin Ali Haq from the UNICEF, Sri Shubhrato Bagchi from Odisha Skill Development Authority, Dr. Tandon from Priya, and Mr. Kant from the Niti Aayog. So with this, we end this first keynote session, and we'll straight away move to our next session. Next session, we have breakout session, parallel session 1. We'll just take a minute break and we'll come back. Thank you to all of you for joining and listening to this conversation.